Thank you also to Matt and to Keith and to the Christ Church family for putting this on, and for the people at Bethel Bible. Just very grateful to be here, and it's when I looked at the sort of number of people sponsoring this and the kind of disparate, shall we say, interests involved, that's a very cool thing to be a part of anytime you see people coming together like that. I'm also very excited that Bob Dylan gets to be involved. Now, maybe you're not a Bob Dylan person, though you probably haven't been able to avoid him if you've been living in this country for the past 60 some odd years. There was a great Onion article recently that said, in reference to Dylan's most recent record, said, posthumous Bob Dylan record released to wonderful reviews. And then, of course, he's still alive, so that was the joke. But if you've seen Dylan recently, sometimes the distinction between living and dying is blurred. I got to see him in concert at the University of Massachusetts a few years ago, and it was, they say that he's off and on in concert. He's either really on or really off. This wasn't one of the on nights. This was sort of lullaby time. But I love Bob Dylan because I consider him to be something of a prophet. And if you're not interested in Bob Dylan, don't worry, I'm not going to talk exclusively about him. But I am going to say a few things about him. I do believe that he sees the world in a remarkably clear terms. Part of that, you see the fluctuation in his output and his persona over the years. It's remarkable. But he has always had a very strong vertical element to his music and to his poetry and to his person. By vertical, I mean he has always been very interested in God. Even though, they famously asked him in 1965, do you read the Bible? And he looked at the person and said, no. But he'd just written an entire album worth of things about the Bible. He's very inscrutable like this. He likes to be facetious and toy with those who are interviewing him. So I like to, he's an inspiration. He's an inspiration, and I took the title of this talk from a song that he wrote in 1963. The title of the talk is Lay Down Your Weary Tune. Lay Down Your Weary Tune, and it's actually a tune he ripped off of a Scottish folk ballad, and he freely admits these things. But it was the first time that Bob Dylan explicitly turned from writing about politics and to the exhaustion of what it would become for him to be seen as a spokesperson of a generation, as a political figure. It was the first time he explicitly decided not to write at all about horizontal dynamics, and he talked about God. He talked about the weary tune, that life is sort of clanging cymbals and waves of noise from which we need respite and refuge. And the voice of God comes in booming during the chorus, saying, lay down your weary tune, lay down the song you strum, and rest yourself neath the strength of strings, whose tune no voice can hum. And it's a very beautiful invitation to letting go, to surrendering, to stopping, to laying down your weariness. Now, I think maybe he wasn't explicitly invoking Jesus Christ. Come unto me, all who are weary and heavy laden, and I will give you rest. But he might as well have been. He was, if nothing else, he was talking about the opposite of one of our most prevalent modern pathologies. What is the pathology at the heart of American society these days? Well, I'll quote the essayist Tim Kreider, who wrote this a few years ago in an essay for the New York Times. He says, if you live in America in the 21st century, you've probably had to listen to a lot of people tell you how busy they are. He's right. Our default response to how are you doing used to be fine or well, but now it's busy. I've probably said it to 3 or 4 people today. I mean, it's an honest answer too, isn't it? We're not making it up. We're not acting, we are busy. Smartphones, certain forms of technology, devices, they've done a lot of good for us, but they have also eliminated the leisure that they were theoretically designed to maximize. A lot of technology was thought to sort of be bringing in an age of nothing but the 20-hour work week. That's in 1965, the Senate convened to talk about the impending threat of the 20-hour work week in America. Because all of the technology was going to make it, everything was going to be automized and mechanized, and we would have all this free time, and summer camps would have to be open all year round. They were extremely mistaken, because what has happened is the pace of life has been so quickened that people are busy. But what is the phrase we use? Crazy busy. We are crazy busy, insanely busy. We acknowledge the insanity, the unsustainability of it in these terms. Yet to be crazy busy is to simply be alive these days. You may know that reports of migraine headaches have gone up by 60% in the last 10 years. At the same time that the suicide rate has doubled. We are the busiest, the wealthiest society on the history of the world, but we also happen to be the unhappiest, the most medicated, and the most suicidal. It's these profound ironies about our current situation. I don't want to bring you down too much, but because America, think about it, we also lead the world. What do we lead the world in? Weather-related holidays. I live in Virginia, and we've been getting a lot of snow. We're not supposed to get as much snow as we've been getting this year. But they cancel school when there's even the thought that there might be a half an inch of snow. And if you're a parent to small children, the first time it's great, let's go sledding. The second time it's like, okay, this will be fun. Third time it's like, someone get me a gun. I need to be put out of my misery because the kids are climbing the walls. I've run out of things we can do. I'm not going to watch Paw Patrol for the 100th episode today. I feel like an awful parent. And I'm trying to manage my life because it doesn't stop. There's no snow days anymore on the internet, for example. But we jump at weather-related holidays because there's no other way for us to let each other off the hook. That's why we lead the world in weather-related holidays, not because we can't negotiate the weather. Not because we're so far behind the Europeans in snow technology. No. It's because it's the only way we know how to take a break. I guess you don't have to deal with this in Texas. What do you deal with, like tornado warnings? What? Snow. You do have snow days. Okay, so you know what I'm talking about.
Texas is a big state.
Texas is enormous, yes. Texas is incredible. What's happened is with this rise in busyness, we've begun to wear it like a badge of honor, right? Almost unintentionally. We know that we're suffering. We know how crazy-making it is. But it's also something that is a bit of a badge of honor. Even though we know that weariness is extremely dangerous. It's extremely dangerous for people who are driving, And what does Louis C.K. say? That pretty much, as far as he can tell, everyone is texting while driving that he's seen out there. We would all rather kill each other in cars than be alone for a moment and not be up to date with who we're trying to get in touch with. But weariness, for those, you talk to a marriage counselor, worse than guilt or anger in a marriage is weariness. That tends to be the tipping point. And we wear it like a status symbol. But what I'm trying to say is that busyness has stopped being about what the activities that we're doing, and it's become one of our culture's predominant indicators of value and of worth. It's become a measure of identity and therefore personal righteousness. I mean, what does it say about you if you're not busy? What does it say about you if you're not busy? Nothing good. So get on the horn and get going, It also says that many writers have talked about busyness being a chief means of distraction, an opiate, a way that we don't have to think about ourselves, essentially. We don't have to be alone with ourselves. Wasn't it Pascal who said that all of mankind's problems can be traced back to his inability to sit alone in a room by himself? And maybe you read that the Atlantic Monthly reported on some study earlier this year that people would rather receive shock treatment than sit alone, idle. Like, given the option, am I going to subject myself to painful shocks, or am I just going to sit here? I think something like 80% of people subjected themselves to shocks. Isn't that interesting? But maybe you don't want to talk about it, but here we are. We got to interview someone, an expert about busyness and about weariness in our most recent issue of the magazine. Her name is Birgit Schulte, and she wrote a book called Overwhelmed. And it was on the New York Times bestseller list, and it made a bunch of columns. She said, this is what she said. This is how she described our situation. She said, we are, life has become, our discussions about busyness and life are predominantly about quantity these days rather than quality. How much stuff you can check off your to-do list, how much stuff you can cram into your schedule. That's also a very human thing. We are imperfect and flawed souls. For many of us, it's very difficult to feel comfortable in our own skin, and that's part of why we get busy. We get busy to cover up and to avoid thinking about those bigger questions about what's really important and what our life means, and also to avoid those feelings of, quote, I don't know, that frightens me, or, quote, I feel inadequate, or, quote, I don't feel like I'm enough. We all have some flavor of I'm not enough, not good enough, not doing enough, not rich enough, not pretty enough, not smart enough. And as humans, we're sort of wired to compare ourselves to others. And then you get into that terrible cycle where you're just always feeling badly about yourself. Someone close to me recently called it an epidemic of personal failure. Isn't that interesting? She goes on to say, I was in North Dakota, sitting in on a focus group on the fast-paced busyness of life. In Fargo, North Dakota, you'd think, well, they have this small farming community. They must have sit-down suppers, front porches, and a slower pace of life without traffic jams or commutes. And you'd think, wouldn't they enjoy their lives more? Wouldn't they have more time for what's important? But sitting around that focus group table, every single person was stressed out of their minds. One woman said the only leisure time she had was when she was awaiting her mammogram in the doctor's office. Another guy said he had a canoe, but he felt too guilty to ever go out and actually canoe, even though it was the one thing he wanted to do more than anything. He told me, well, you know, idle hands at the devil's workshop. I thought, what? You're out in a canoe, you are busy, you're paddling. Your hands are not idle. You're out looking into the beauty of the world, you're soaking it in. But people feel that what's not productive is not worthy. She's not the only one talking about this. That incredibly, infallible source known as the Huffington Post reported recently. There was actually a Presbyterian minister who wrote, he said, in America, we are defined by what we do, our careers, what we produce. It's the first question asked at parties, and often the first tidbit of information we share with strangers. The implication is if that I'm not busy doing something, I am somehow less than, not worthy, or at least worth less than those who are producing something. What these people are describing is the law. Thou shalt be busy. Be busy and live. If thou art busy, then thou shalt inherit eternal life. This is this value system that we've bought into. And it is a weary, weary tune, but it is the same weary tune that has been sung by all human beings throughout human history, where we try to hang our value and our worth on something we can theoretically control, some sort of standard of righteousness. Maybe it's money, maybe it's beauty, maybe it's over-occupation. But there's always some little capital, like little L, not capital L, law, telling us that you are only worthy if you are fill in the blank. Right now it's busy. And as with all barometers of self-worth, there is no enough. My absolute favorite Onion article, the satirical newspaper, was when they reported in 2011, they said, fully validated Kanye West retires to quiet farm in Iowa. There is no enough. There's no enough validation for Kanye West, just as there's no enough busyness for you. There's not enough money for John D. Rockefeller. And there's not enough beauty for, I don't know, who would you want to, who should I say? Kate Upton. Who? Those things are always fluctuating. Anyway, Megan McGill. Oh, there you go. Points. What we're trying to do with our busyness, therefore, if it really has some sort of legal, law-based implication, is we're trying to justify ourselves. We're trying to justify ourselves by works of the law, by works of busyness. Now, this idea that we are all trying to justify ourselves by some sort of doing is central, not only to our lives as 21st century Americans, it is absolutely central to the Bible's understanding of life. That our drive for justification, My life has value. I am worth something. See how busy my schedule is? I can't even show up at the Mockingbird conference. You know? See, you guys have all failed already. So that's why it's great to talk to you, because you clearly had a free Friday night. You know? I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. You're busy. You're here. You're occupied. You're not doing nothing. Oh, too close to the bone. Okay. But we look to the enoughness that we try to get, that we try to squeeze out of things like busyness. You know, it may help for like a little bit, but like any form of enoughness, it's remarkably short-lived. And before long, we realize that we're looking to the law to do that which it cannot do, which is give us peace. This is why when Bob Dylan was interviewed in 2011 in what may be the most entertaining interview that Rolling Stone has ever published. I've never read a more contentious interview in my life. He asks to get up and leave like 3 different times. And he talks about how he's been transfigured. It's the most incredible. Find it. You can find it on Mockingbird. But this is what they asked. They said, so live performance, is that a purpose you find fulfilling? Dylan responded by saying, if you're not fulfilled in other ways, performing can never make you happy. No kind of life is fulfilling if your soul hasn't been redeemed. So what the obsession with busyness reveals to me, and I think it reveals pretty transparently to all of us, is that everyone is working for their justification. Everyone is religious, whether or not they claim to believe in God. They're all worshiping at the altar of something they think is going to exonerate them, that is going to prove them worthy. And this is why Dylan wrote the song, Gotta Serve Somebody. Maybe you know that song. Gotta Serve Somebody. My favorite verse comes it's like verse 6 of 12. And when he actually talks about preachers, he says, you may be a preacher with your spiritual pride. You may be a city councilman taking bribes on the side. You may be working in a barber shop. You may know how to cut hair. You may be somebody's mistress, maybe somebody's heir, but you're going to have to serve somebody. Yes, indeed. It may be the devil, or it may be the Lord, but you're going to have to serve somebody. And isn't that true? Of course, we think, well, hey, we're Christians. We're serving the one true God. That is a superficial view of what it means to be a Christian. Because all the churches that I go into are full of people serving themselves, serving the ministry, their territory they've carved out, or their own sort of personal agenda of being a good Christian, being known as a holy person. Are we serving God? I don't know. Maybe we are. We're certainly there theoretically worshiping God. But what I see is everyone trying to earn their salvation. I see a deeply religious culture. So when people ask what about creeping secularization in America? I say, what secularization? What are you talking about? I've never seen so much worship. Have you watched what people do at an airport when their flight's canceled? They are so hell-bent on control, personal control and mastery, and that they just freak out. Or watch what happens when someone's phone falls into a pool. Whoa! It's like you've killed their child. We are all attempting to justify ourselves by works of the law, whether they are actions or attributes. It's the default mode of human operation, not the select few who classify themselves as religious. So what I'm saying to you is that the law, thou shalt be blank, thou shalt be perfect, thou shalt be righteous, thou shalt be good, that reigns over all creation. And it is our point of connection with the whole human race, as well as ourselves. This is one of the things that the website that Mockingbird runs that we're tirelessly trying to do, is point out all the the laws that we subscribe to. Thou shalt have a second home. Thou shalt have exotic vacations. And if thou shalt not have exotic vacations, thou shalt construct beautiful pictures that look like you're having an exotic vacation. I mean, what is social media if not one massive project in justifying ourselves? What do they say about social media? I mean, I happen to like social media a lot. Mockingbird thrives on this stuff. However, the studies show that the more time you spend on Facebook, the happier you perceive your friends to be, and the unhappier you are as a result. The data shows it, people, and science doesn't lie, as we all know, right? Okay, so what I'm saying is that we are living in a performancist culture, and this is just a variation on what the Bible talks about when we say people who are trying to justify themselves by works of the law. I mean, what is performancism? It's the paradigm of life where there's no distinction between your resume and you. It's not a piece of paper. It's actually you right there. There's no distinction between the school you went to, the level of success of your children, and you yourself. Now, it might be a bank balance, or it might be the number that reads out on the weight scale. It might be church attendance records, or it might be college admission results. But if you are not doing and doing well, your very life is at stake. And this is why you get people wrapped up in the frantic activity of busyness. A performances mindset is one that is ensconced in law. It has no regard for your dignity or well-being. And as something that's ensconced in law, it's driving an enormous amount of exhaustion and dread. So if you want to know where self-justification is at work in your life, just look at what makes you most tired. Because that will be the place where you're never able to do enough, be enough, improve enough. That will be the place that is the definition of exhaustion. Sadly, as I said, the Christian church has not been immune to this mindset, which is, I would say, the height of worldliness. We give people the impression that Christianity is first and foremost about the sacrifice we make for Jesus, rather than the sacrifice he made for us. Our performance for him rather than his performance for us. Our obedience to him rather than his obedience on our behalf. But the central hub of the gospel is not do something for Jesus. It's Jesus has done this for you. That's what Good Friday and Easter are about. We're not getting up there to celebrate our obedience. We're getting up there to celebrate something that happened in history that gives us reason to hope that death is not the final word over our lives. I fear that too many people, both inside and outside the church, have heard the plea for intensified devotion and concluded that the focus of the Christian faith is our love for God instead of God's love for us. I mean, it seems like that you spend much time. I was talking to someone just last night who was saying that in the context in which he operates, the gospel has become synonymous with morality, meaning there's no distinction between righteous behavior and the good news of God. That's a problematic situation. That's a recipe for the good news of grace being hijacked by rules. Doing more, trying harder, getting better, fixing ourselves, our kids, our spouses, our friends, our enemies, our culture, our world. Christianity is perceived as a vehicle for good behavior and clean living and the judgments that result from them, rather than the only recourse for those who have failed over and over and over again. I can't help but think that this is where the law of God, we don't need more little L laws, more performance reviews. God help us. We do not need more performance reviews. And people get nervous when you talk too much about grace. You know, they always think, well, you're making people lazy if you say that they're not, that God loves them no matter what. It's like laziness is just not a problem in America. It's not a problem. It's like if we were living in a place where there were a lot of deadbeats around and they were all in church, then I'd be concerned. Church is filled with the most type A group of neurotic self-saviors that you've ever seen. I mean, I'm one of them. That's why I can say this. We don't need to hear more about more condemnation, more law. We might need to hear a little bit more about God's law, though. Or perhaps this is where we feel it's lost more acutely. Because if the ever-shifting, never-stopping laws of society give us the illusion of meeting their demands before, for that brief second before the next set appears, well, then the big L, big capital L, law of God, confronts our collective striving by stopping us in our tracks and putting us on the same playing field, level playing field, not that of winners, but of losers, of sinners. Regardless of how good we feel ourselves to be or how well we feel we're doing or what we think we're becoming, there is no getting around the accusatory voice coming from the Sermon on the Mount that says, "Be perfect as your Father in heaven is perfect." To hear those words clearly is to hear that we are significantly worse off than we imagine ourselves to be. And that when it gets down to our motivations, which Christ seems very intent on ratcheting up to the level of action, well, even the best things we do have something in them that needs to be forgiven. This is why Bob Dylan said in 1985, he said, "We're all sinners. People seem to think that because their sins are different from other people's sins, they're not sinners. People don't like to think of themselves as sinners. It makes them feel uncomfortable. What do you mean, a sinner? It puts them at a disadvantage in their mind. Most people walking around have this strange conception that they're born good, that they're really good people, but the world has just made a mess of their lives. But it's not hard for me to identify with anybody who's on the wrong side. We're really all on the wrong side." A few years later, he wrote an incredible song called "Everything is Broken." It's on the Oh Mercy record. It's an amazing song. Now, I live in Charlottesville, Virginia, and Charlottesville, Virginia is the home of the University of Virginia, and you may not know anything. It's people there think it's the best thing that's ever happened to the humanity, but it's and it's a great place. It's a beautiful place. But we've had 3 national news stories this past fall that have punctured our view of ourselves as inherently good. We had a girl go missing, and it turned out she was murdered. We had Rolling Stone wrote an article about this the rape culture at UVA, and it turned out to be mostly trumped up. In fact, the police report came out this week. However, it was deeply disturbing, and there is a problem with sexual assault on that campus. But then just last week, there was a young black student, an honor student, who was beaten bloody by the alcohol police there. And I say that because the New York Times interviewed a young man today. He said, a student, a 4th year at UVA, he said, "It's really frustrating. We know we live in a good community, but these bad incidents keep on happening." You know, and we know what he means. We all live in communities that are sort of day-to-day pretty good. But there is a deeper reality here. We like to say that people mean well, that they are basically good, but these, quote, bad incidents keep on happening. Yes, they do. It turns out we're not naturally civil people. Throughout history, we've needed the fear of state-enforced torture, humiliation, banishment, imprisonment, or death to keep us straight. Only self-interest keeps most of us in line. As much optimism as we find in America and elsewhere, the entire order of our world with its police and prisons and armies and lawyers is based on the assumptions that we are sinners by nature. Perhaps there is something radically wrong with us in our communities that only desperate measures can address it. Desperate measures like those we see taken on Good Friday and Easter. Now, people think it's shaming to talk of yourself as a sinner. People think it's shaming to have a sort of what I would call a sober anthropology, an understanding of human nature as severely flawed and compromised. That it's defeatist, but it's not. This is not defeatist at all. What's defeatist is the desperation of trying to pretend otherwise, to insist that I can free myself, but I just haven't managed it yet. I mean, don't we find that the resulting humility that comes from an understanding of yourself as a sinner actually gives you compassion for other people who turns out are just like you? Not to mention yourself. This is the reason why the saints that we find, saints of history, I mean, even Mother Teresa, the more they, quote-unquote, grow in holiness, their perception of it is that they're worse and worse and worse and less holy. They get more convicted of their sin rather than less. God becomes bigger to them as they become smaller. Now, this is why St. Augustine wrote that the law contributes nothing to God's saving act. All these laws that we have in society and that we have in the church, it does but show man his weakness, that by faith he may take refuge in divine mercy and be healed. Isn't that a beautiful thing to think about? So what I'm advocating for here is not a matter of willpower or knowledge, that we just need to think of busyness in a new way or think of our own self-justifying impulses. These are clearly bigger than our ability to control them. What does Bob Dylan say? He says, "If there's an original thought out there, I sure could use it right now." He is actually talking about Jesus Christ with that statement. And it's from Brownsville Girl. It's the most amazing song. We need more than an adjusted mindset. We need a Savior. Into this situation, the gospel announces that we are justified by grace through faith, not by what we do or who we are, but by what Christ has done and who he is. Our guilt, which is real, has been atoned for. The law has been fulfilled. In Christ, that ultimate demand has been met. The deepest judgment against us has been satisfied. In his death and resurrection, our sin was imputed to him, and his righteousness to us. Now this is past tense. It's not up for grabs. Something has been accomplished, and that something is total. Remember those dying words that we're going to read on Friday from the cross are, "It is finished," which means that as far as God is concerned, the performance is at an end. Gold stars all around. This is why we don't need any more job evaluations. Needless to say, the reality of God's grace is so radical that we often try to find ourselves domesticating it, unconsciously or not, imposing all manner of fine print about what constitutes acceptance or rejection of grace. We say that we want some say in the matter. We want to influence or control it, don't we? Which is precisely the thing that we need to be saved from. We go off about the proper response to the gift, which is Jesus Christ, as if God is subject to our code of manners. I mean, at Christmas, for example, what if you forget to send a thank you note immediately to someone who gives you a gift, right? Or what if when you do, it's pretty shabby? You wrote it on toilet paper. Who writes thank you notes on toilet paper? Just don't write one. What if you never send one? Is the gift revoked? That wouldn't have been a gift. That would have been a gift premised on its response. That would have been a wage. That would have been, or a bribe. The future response is a bribe. The past response is a wage. It's not a gift. You know, on Christmas, what do we celebrate? We celebrate the gift. Jesus Christ, who is pure gift, the light that shines to those who dwell in darkness. And, you know, as any married couple can attest, the more pressure we place on a recipient to react in a certain way, the less likely they are to do so, right? Anyway, don't ask my wife about her engagement ring. The friendship analogy, though, can help us. As one of the most common ways we divest God's grace of its purity and reintroduce the law, reintroduce this proving, this earning, is by jumping too hastily into relationship language. Am I right? While there is indeed a sense in which God invites, this gift invites its recipient into dialogue, into gratitude and prayer, thanksgiving, confession, our tit-for-tat programming is so strong that it tends to co-opt the beauty of grace and reposition it conditionally. Which makes sense, because even our closest relationships on earth have some element of conditionality, of give and take. How could we not project that dynamic if we're talking about relationships? How could we not project it onto our Heavenly Father? He did everything for me, now it's time for me to do something for Him. Or so the thinking goes. Yet as we know, obligation yields guilt. Guilt creates distance, and soon we're not returning the calls. Or we're editing our prayer life to the extent that it's just a complete phoniness. I think that the chief cause of Christian burnout, and we see it a lot, Christian burnout, people leaving the faith, has to do with overly optimistic expectations of oneself and other people, of playing God, of yourself and those around you. That those vaunted expectations become a recipe for resentment, which lies at the root of most of the sort of just giving up. But if our lives are not grounded, if our Christian spirituality, if our devotion is not grounded in the sense that people, ourselves included, are sinners, are broken and flawed and helplessly compromised, we are going to have a hard time loving them or ourselves. An accompanying appreciation for the largeness of God and trust in the Holy Spirit to be working beyond your capability tends to be a wonderful and very life-giving thing, and something that I would hope on our best days Mockingbird is trying to advocate for. Because remember, if the focus of our faith becomes what we can do for God instead of what God has done for us, trouble and grudge holding and burnout almost always ensue, which is the opposite of the gratitude which the gospel produces and which tends to motivate all manner of works of love and charity. I'm going to give you an example before I end of one of my favorite, he's a fellow Dylan aficionado. His name's Paul Westerberg. Anyone here know who Paul Westerberg is? Yes. He's the front man for The Replacements, a group that was very big in the 1980s. And they're just reunited. But it doesn't matter if you know who they are. That's why you should buy my book. Just kidding. They should buy it. Don't buy it. The law will backfire. Okay, in 2004, Paul Westerberg wrote a eulogy song for his father, in which he included a very telling bit of trivia. This is about his dad. He's a 50-year-old man writing about his father's death. It turns out that his father never saw him play a single concert. Now, such an admission might imply a lack of love, but to the man himself, to Paul, it was the exact opposite. This is what he said in an interview. He said, "I've always maintained, and I still to this day, I'm perfectly fine that my father never came to my office and watched me work. It kept it pure that I was his son, and I was no more than the little boy he played catch with, who now plays catch with his son." What an incredible thing to say. So many father-son relationships, so many father-daughter, mother-daughter relationships, even the good ones, contain some element of proving, some element of conditionality. Theirs, it would appear, did not. Paul's father loved him apart from his celebrity, apart from his achievements, and Paul knew it. He couldn't possibly be more to his father than he already was. Now, such grace might explain why his father's death inspired him not to turn away from Christianity, but toward it. So what have I said? I've said that in a life that's governed by the law, threat of judgment looms over every endeavor, whether it be religious or otherwise. But in a life that is governed by the gospel of grace, nothing that needs to be done hasn't already been done. Or as Martin Luther so famously wrote in Thesis 23 of the Heidelberg Disputation, "The law says, do this, and it is never done. Grace says, believe in this, and everything is already done." We have nothing to lose or gain. The pressure to self-justify has been removed, whether we believe it or not. And it has been replaced with freedom. The freedom to die and yet to live, to fail and yet succeed. The freedom to play, to serve, to love, to wait, to laugh, to cry, to sit idle, even to get busy. Ultimately, what is the freedom, though? It is just that, freedom. It is for freedom you have been set free. So the judgments against us will persist, just as sin persists, but the gospel pronounces that those judgments have lost their bite. The law has been defanged. The condemnation you and I feel in the midst of our insane, crazy, busy lives is simply a feeling, no more binding than any other. So we may judge others, and they may judge us. We may judge ourselves. But God has gotten out of the judgment game. Christ is his final word on that score. And this is not just good news. This is the best news. So lay down your weary tune. Lay down. Lay down the song you strum. And rest yourself neath the strength of strings no voice can hope to hum. Thank you for coming.